Good afternoon. My name is Anna McLeod Cushman, and I am an immigration attorney, and it is my pleasure to provide this educational series to you in the hopes that this basic understanding of our U.S. immigration system will help you to better connect and to learn from and to engage and to relate with immigrants and refugees here locally in the Charlotte area and beyond. I am a board certified immigration specialist, which is a distinction given by the North Carolina Bar, basically signifying that I've dedicated my law practice to this specialty area, that is immigration law. I am a member of St. John's Baptist Church, and with that in mind, I'm pleased to provide this educational series to my church family, but hope that you will take and use it on your journey to understanding. Lastly, I want to say that this presentation will go into the law. I'm not going to discuss policy or hot topics that you may hear about on the news. When I say policy, I'm talking about the ways in which the law is interpreted, the ways in which the law is enforced. Those things can change from administration to administration from day to day. We are going to focus on the bedrock laws which create our U.S. immigration system. So as we jump into each part of the system, we will advance through the videos. For example, this first video recording is an overview. This is Immigration 101. However, in Immigration 102, Immigration 103, and Immigration 104, we will go more in depth into the subparts of the immigration system that I've outlined. I will also say that I am providing this presentation in my personal capacity. My views and the information shared here is not representative of my employer and its views and opinions. This presentation purely comes from Anna Cushman, immigration attorney, St. John's Church family member, and I hope that you'll remember that and walk with me as we learn about and I share about the legal system that we have in the United States in place at this time. So let me jump to the PowerPoint presentation that will provide the framework for today. Okay, so U.S. Immigration 101. We are jumping into our educational series here now. There are three principal parts to the U.S. immigration system. I divide it up that way because I find it to be the simplest way to do it. Our system has been compared in complexity to our tax code. So we are doing our best to break this down into subsections that we can understand. So we will spend time exploring the humanitarian-based system, the family-based system, and the employment-based system. Bottom line, in the family-based and employment-based system, there must be a relationship between the U.S. citizen or the lawful permanent resident and a family member, or in the employment-based context, there must be an employer-employee relationship between a U.S. company and the employee for whom that company is petitioning. While humanitarian benefits do not require any of those specific relationships. Now, it's important to keep our eye on the ball here. What are the different types of immigration statuses out there? Well, the one you're probably most familiar with is that of U.S. citizenship. There are several ways to obtain U.S. citizenship. For example, you can be born in the 50 states, born inside the United States, or you could be born abroad and yet be born a U.S. citizen, and we'll go into that in more depth. but certainly US citizenship carries the most rights here in the United States. Next, we have lawful permanent residency. LPR is a common letters that we use in immigration law to signify legal permanent resident, lawful permanent resident. And that's basically the green card. You may have heard of the green card. Everyone wants to get their green card. Everyone wants to get citizenship. That is a critical step for folks who were not born US citizens and want to become citizens. They must become lawful permanent residents first. Importantly, they may live and work in the United States permanently. So those are pretty critical rights that attach to lawful permanent residency. Now, conditional permanent resident, those folks have a green card as well, but it's valid for 2 years. And the reasoning for that is marriage fraud, unfortunately exists. And so new marriages are individuals who immigrate to the US based on a new marriage are only going to obtain conditional permanent residency for 2 years, and then they'll have the opportunity to obtain full lawful permanent residency. Now, beyond US citizenship, beyond residency, conditional permanent residency, there are folks who have the right to remain in the United States for a specific period of time for a specific reason. And so here are a few classes of folks who have the right to be here, but yet are not green card holders, are not citizens. Forgive me for the acronyms you'll see throughout the presentation. I'll do my best to explain those. The TPS you see there is temporary protected status. Later in the humanitarian law video, Immigration 102, we'll go into more depth as what is temporary protected status. Now, there are non-immigrant visas as well, and these non-immigrant visas, I call it the alphabet soup. Basically, there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, on down types of non-immigrant visas, and each of those categories corresponds to a particular purpose of the individual to come to the US for a limited duration for a specific reason. So student visas permit you to come and study. They do not permit you to come and work, for example. So there's a whole host of non-immigrant visas out there. And then of course, there's folks who are undocumented. Those are people who are residing in the US illegally, or I prefer to say without permission. And they have, so they entered without permission, or they overstayed their visa. That is, they were permitted to come for a specific period, but they remained beyond the end of that authorized period of stay. So those are the two different ways in which someone is undocumented inside the United States. Another part of our system, which we will touch on, but does not fit neatly within the three parts, is our system to remove people, to deport people from the United States. This is a photo of the Charlotte Immigration Court over there on Albemarle Road. It looks like a fairly nondescript office building, but some very important business goes on inside. That is where the Executive Office of Immigration Review, a sub-agency of the Department of Justice, conducts administrative proceedings regarding whether an individual has the right to remain in the United States or does not, and will be deported by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. In that proceeding, the immigrant, the individual facing deportation, is known as the respondent. They're not a defendant. That term is used exclusively in a criminal context. This is an administrative law context. However, the penalty for failing to meet your burden in this court is exile, essentially, from the United States. So although it is not a criminal hearing, the penalties, deportation, exile, are quite severe, perhaps even more severe than some criminal penalties that we can think of. And so Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, that agency provides lawyers who prosecute the case, who move the removal case forward before the immigration judge. At the moment, we've got 69 immigration courts around the country, and we have one in our backyard. It's important to know a bit about the administrative landscape. That is, there are several administrative agencies who are responsible, who have roles to play, rather, within our U.S. immigration system. So there's the U.S. Department of Labor, whose mission is to protect the U.S. worker. They come into play in the employment-based context. And then there's the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, created after 9/11, which has several sub-agencies, such as U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. That is the agency that I deal with it the most, because that is our domestic immigration agency, and that is the agency that receives applications from individuals for status, for citizenship, for green cards. But there's also the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I mentioned them earlier. They have lots of different functions throughout the country, but you can find them in the form of attorneys at the deportation court. You can find them conducting operations within the U.S., trying to enforce the immigration laws that we have. Then, of course, the Customs and Border Protection, those are the guys at the airport who admit people to the United States or refuse to admit them to the United States. That's just one important function of CBP. But then you also have the U.S. Department of Justice, and there again, the Executive Office of Immigration Review. Those are the immigration judges, and they are responsible for conducting those administrative hearings in the removal context that we were discussing. And let's not forget the U.S. Department of State. They are the agency that actually issues visas. The visa is the sticker in the passport. We may colloquially use the word visa all the time. Oh yeah, his visa, her visa, his visa runs out, she's here on this visa. But truly, the visa is the sticker in the passport. The sticker in the passport allows someone to present themselves to Customs and Border Protection and seek admission in that particular status. So if someone has a student visa sticker in their passport issued by the U.S. consulate in their home country, they can then get on the airplane, arrive in the United States, ask Customs and Border Protection to admit them as an F1 student status. So they're applying at the border seeking status. We don't seek a visa necessarily. The visa is a means to an end, and the end is status. Because once you're inside the United States, admitted into a particular status, you have certain rights that attach to that status. It's important to understand non-immigrant intent and immigrant intent. So I've got 2 slides on that. Forgive me, this is a little bit wordy, but basic understanding is someone who is a non-immigrant is a person who intends to come to the US for a specific reason and return to their residence abroad. So returning to their residence abroad is critical to non-immigrant intent. Someone who seeks to come to the US and remain here indefinitely, that is immigrant intent. So when we talk about immigrants, generally, colloquially, it's not quite fair to include in that term folks who just come to Disney World and go home. I would say those folks are non-immigrants. They come as a tourist and intend to return to their home. They do not have immigrant intent. So although they are foreign nationals, meaning they are not US citizens, they do not really have any rights here besides what their visitor status gives them, they are non-immigrants, and not immigrants in that sort of colloquial term that we use. So here we go, intent to reside in the US. Someone who has obtained a green card or lawful permanent residency absolutely has the intent to reside in the US, has immigrant intent. If you don't have immigrant intent, then they're not going to give you a green card that would permit you to reside here indefinitely. That's just out of alignment. So this slide talks a bit about how there is a presumption that everyone who comes to the US wants to stay here forever. And so if you're seeking that tourist visa to just come to Disney World, you're going to need to prove to the Department of State that you truly want to just go to Disney World and go back home. And that can be a high burden, particularly if you are coming from a poorer country and you yourself do not have a lot of resources. They may believe that this is an in run to get into the country and stay forever and escape your poverty and the turmoil in your home country, not truly a pleasure trip to Disney World. So that presumption of immigrant intent is pretty strong and can prevent individuals from around the world from coming to the US as they wish to do, because they may be coming from a country that in fact doesn't have hardly a government anymore, or is going through a civil war, or whatever turmoil is there, and it raises the bar for someone to be able to prove that they truly are going to come visit and return to their home country. The green card. Most people have heard of citizenship and the green card, and it's important to note that with the green card comes the right to live and work in the United States on a permanent basis. The right to work is something that I think most of us think about as almost basic human right in a way, to work and support oneself. But the right to work does not attach to all immigration benefits. In fact, you really have to look at what each, the purpose is of each status, and check the rules as to which ones include work authorization. But one of the reasons the green card is so sought after is because it gives you the permanent right to live and work here, while other statuses do not. You may come and go as many times as you please, however, must continue to maintain a residence inside the United States. If not, then you may be accused of abandoning your residency and, in fact, losing that status. Remember, I mentioned citizenship and how there's several different ways to obtain it. Well, this goes into those three different ways. Acquisition. Let's say you're born in Germany to a US citizen mother and a US citizen father. You are not born, on US soil. However, you acquire US citizenship at the time of birth because the law says so. Because the law says if you have two US citizen parents and you're born abroad, then you yourself are born a US citizen. And then the next derivation of US citizenship, this is when, by operation of law, you become a citizen later, after birth. For example, your parents may naturalize and become citizens, and if you comply with the rules of the law at the time, such as being under 18 and having a green card yourself when your parents naturalize, you too will become a US citizen. But most people think of naturalization when you actually apply, and there's a test, English test and a civics exam. And so most people think about naturalization in that process. And by and large, I'd say that is the more better understood process. You must have that green card for 5 years in order to apply for naturalization, but there's a special provision for individuals who are spouses of US citizens who are only required to have 3 years of lawful permanent residency before seeking naturalization or US citizenship. The humanitarian-based benefits that we will go into later in our 102 video, this is an overview of them. And bottom line is these individuals it's not required that they have a family relationship or an employee-employer relationship with a US company. These particular statuses and benefits derive from the humanitarian crisis or the humanitarian problem that this individual has faced. And it's based on those particular circumstances in that individual's life, not a relationship to any other person. It's also important to note, you hear a lot about unaccompanied minors at the border. Here's the definition. Basically, an unaccompanied child is a person who's under the age of 18, and they are separated from both parents and not being cared for by an adult. And so this distinction triggers special treatment from our government as to how do we treat and handle unaccompanied children. And so we'll go into some benefits that directly touch on this designation, such as special immigrant juvenile status. This is a humanitarian form of relief for individuals who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by one or both parents. This is a path to lawful permanent residency, but it requires a state court order confirming that this individual child has been abused, neglected, or abandoned, and it is contrary to the best interest of the child for them to return to their home country. So this benefit has sort of an intersection between state law and federal law. In the family-based context, US citizens can petition for certain family members. So you can see in that middle column, those are the family members that US citizens can petition for. I'll explain later more the designations in the right-hand column, but just you can start to wrap your mind around this is the list. You know, if you're not on this list, then you're not going to be petitioned by your US citizen relative. Cousins don't count. Now, LPR, lawful permanent resident, they too can petition for family members, but it's a much shorter list. And we'll go into what those designations, the F2A and F2B designations, mean later in the 103 video. But just think of in this family-based system, you've got a petition. You got a petitioner filing for a beneficiary. The petitioner is the US citizen or the lawful permanent resident. That petition provides the foundation for the case. Employment-based immigration, you can divide that into immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas. Again, immigrant visas are going to have that immigrant intent tied to it, a green card, while non-immigrant visas do not have immigrant intent. These folks do intend to return to their home country and their residence abroad after they have worked in the US for that particular employer in that particular job for that set period of time. You must have a US employer filing this petition. By and large, that is the crux of this part of our system. And it really focuses on the job. What is the job? What are the qualifications for the job? How does this individual meet those qualifications such that the petition can be approved and the individual may come to the US on the appropriate visa, get the appropriate status, and start to work for that employer in that job. Here's an overview of those non-immigrant visas. We'll go into greater depth in this later, but just I got the kind of the practical considerations there on the right. We'll go into those in greater detail later as well. In summary, there are many legal pathways to come to the US, whether it's in the humanitarian side, family-based or employment-based benefits, but yet there are many gaps And there are many individuals who want to come to the United States, and there's simply not a way for them to do so. So here I mentioned a few categories of folks who come to mind who are not provided for in these different parts of the system. But we will go into that in greater detail in our next video. But I did want to share one more slide with you before we close. Just bear with me as I navigate to it. You may be thinking, okay, I just learned a bit of an overview about our US immigration system. What now? Well, this is just a start, my friends. This is where you begin to touch and hear and sort of wade around in the terms and the concepts that form our immigration system. The disclaimer I wanted to mention was this is just the law. I am not even going into policy changes. So just remember that. You may hear about things in the news or from friends and others. And I don't dispute that you may hear something that sounds a bit different from the law that I'm describing. And the point is that the executive branch has incredible power as to how to interpret and to give life to the laws that I'm describing to you. So we're just going to start with the basics here. Here's a little bit about the resources I use and just some ideas for you as you think about where to go from here. Of course, it's important to study the many immigrant and refugee experiences that you find in the Bible. You could attend a master calendar deportation hearing at the Charlotte Immigration Court when that's a possibility again. You could volunteer locally, monitor proposed legislation, state and national level, and learn more about that and what might be the positive and negative impacts on the immigrant community in North Carolina. Certainly act with your dollars and support immigrant-owned businesses locally and nationally, and just simply try to combat myths and falsehoods that are all too often shared amongst friends, family, and colleagues about immigrants and their experience. And so my hope is you'll be better equipped to do that with this information. You may also promote a positive narrative of immigrants and refugees who simply wish to live freely and safely in the US, raise their children, provide them something better than they themselves had. And then, of course, let's not allow our elected leaders to run amok. Let's hold them accountable regarding the promises that they make and challenge them on the policy decisions that they say are best for our country. We should really ask, what is the impact on immigrants and refugees based on that policy? And then just simply practice kindness and understanding towards all. That's where it really comes back to, because our system is about who to admit into the US and who to exclude. And so right there, we are talking about this legal exercise of who do we not want and who do we want? Who do we want to live with? Who do we want to commune with? And who do we not? Who do we want to expel from our lands and not have them live among us? And so this is a tough area to delve into when we ourselves as Christians are called to love one another. There's no asterisks there regarding national origin or status. And so please just keep all of that in mind, that you're learning about a system that is about who to exclude and who to include. But the bottom line is we need to remember our calling to welcome the stranger and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So with that, I will bid you adieu for the first video, Immigration 101. Thank you for your attention.